Someone just said, I'm enjoying this more than Starfield. I think that's because this actually has a plot. I like the idea. See, the problem with Starfield is it's the exact example of the fact that a lot of pointlessness does not mean the game is bigger and better. When people say to me, oh, it's going to have, what's the phrase? The procedural generation. It's going to have procedural generation, that kind of stuff. Okay? Procedural generation is good at making a lot of stuff, but it's not good at making bespoke, curated, specific, well-written, well-designed stuff. That's the way. If you were to go out to eat some food, would you rather have a really nice hand-cooked specific meal in which every single thing tasted incredible, but there was a decent amount but not too much? Or would you rather go out for literally endless amounts of flavourless slop? Now, some people might enjoy the extremity of the flavourless slop, but most people will want a smaller amount of quality. And this is what people aren't quite getting in the gaming world. And I swear to God, it is executives that don't play games that find this stuff impressive. When someone says, oh my God, this game's going to be 1,000 hours long, that's not a great selling point for a lot of gamers. Is it 1,000 hours of specifically well-written, well-curated, tight plot? Is it 1,000 hours of good mechanics, stacking mechanics, interesting, engaging, emergent gameplay that's been designed to be as good as it can possibly be? Or is it 1,000 hours of repetition, of doing the same thing, of just procedurally generating the same basic thing again and again and again and again and again? And the only people that are impressed by how big a game is are the executives who are using this as a selling point. 1,000-hour game is useless if you don't want to play it for 1,000 hours. I would very much rather play a really, really well-made 10-hour game instead of a really poorly made 100-hour game. Now, every now and again, you'll get a really well-made 100 to 200-hour game. They are very rare. We're talking The Witcher 3. We're talking Baldur's Gate 3. We're talking Elden Ring. Now, every now and again, you'll get a game that is massive and contains a hell of a lot of good stuff. You know, that's very, very impressive. The problem comes when you get 100 hours of gameplay packed into 1,000 hours of game. That's not that good. So when people say to me, oh, you've got to play this game, it's huge. Okay. What's there? It's easier to make something big than it is to make something good. I mean, I'm guessing that most of my audience, most of you guys we tend to be, and again, don't get offended, this is true, we tend to be a little bit older. You know, I'm not exactly appealing to the 12 to 15-year-old TikTok Zoomer generation. I'm sure some of you might be, 14, 15, that's fine, but the vast majority of my audience tends to be between 20 and 40. And that tends to be when people have jobs, when people are at university or college, when people are starting families. And the appeal of a 500-hour game takes on a bit of a sour note. Have any of you looked at a game that advertises itself as being really bloody long as a positive and actually thought to yourself, I now don't want to play that because I don't have that much time? What's strange to me is that Baldur's Gate 3 came out, which is 100 to 200 to 300 hours RPG, and then Starfield came out, which is a massive game as well, then something else will come out. A lot of people asked me why I didn't play Baldur's Gate 3. Two reasons. One, I wanted to enjoy it, and so I'm going to play it slowly. But the second reason is I want to finish it, and finishing a 300-hour RPG on stream is a difficult thing because I play at about 40% efficiency if I'm streaming. If I'm sat there playing a game, I'm just playing it. If I'm sat there making a video or streaming, in 1 hour, I'll probably progress for about 15 minutes. You guys know how I am with RuneScape. I take a long time to get anywhere, but it's very difficult to play. There is no way that I'll be able to finish Baldur's Gate 3 on stream, and then Starfield, and then this, and then that. There are so many super long games that I know that I won't be able to finish, so I do not bother starting, because I want to play them in my off time and enjoy them. I've not even installed Baldur's Gate 3 yet, because I'm scared it'll eat into my work. But Starfield was another example of quantity instead of quality, and I think this is just indicative of the gaming kind of creation landscape in general that the people with money, the high-up executives, the businesses with money, don't actually care about the quality of the game. They care about the quantity of game that they can say they've made, because in their mind, more quantity of game means more money. Every now and again, you'll get a game that's small, focused, knows what it is, and is really good. Good example, Vampire Survivors. Factorio. They know exactly what they've got. Here it is. Doesn't need to be a huge extended cinematic universe. This is the game. Enjoy it. That's it. Procedural generation works in games like Vampire Survivors because it's just given me more of exactly what I want. It might not work in Starfield because I kind of want a plot in my RPGs. In fact, this is a very interesting question, and I think that you need to be honest with yourself. Have any of you in the chat, and if you're watching this on a clip on YouTube, leave a comment down below because I am interested in this. I'll talk about it on Discord later on. Have any of you originally started being really impressed by stuff like procedural generation? Really impressed by the idea of something being thousands of hours long, and then you actually played it, and over the months, over the years, realized it's actually quite boring? Because that happens a lot. People come and say to me, oh my god, it's going to be massive, it's going to be huge, and this epic quest. And then people do it and they're like, actually, this is quite boring after a while. It's like the people say, oh, there's unlimited quests in Skyrim. Are there? Or are there just like 6 quests that are repeated for the entire game? Constantly. Forever. It's like when people come to me and say, oh my god, this metaverse is going to work. This NFT game is going to work. This procedural generation RPG is going to work. It sounds great. It's not fun to play. And because you can't quantify how fun something is to an executive, they don't care. I mean, procedural generation does fit a certain genre of game. Things like Cluster Truck, where you just run forward. Things like an endless zombie horde shooter. Things like a parkour game. I think procedural generation would be super interesting in a game like Mirror's Edge. Imagine having a competitive parkour-style game where you and a friend have to constantly chase each other, catch each other, avoid enemies in a procedurally generated running landscape. Minecraft is procedurally generated, and it works for that kind of game. What it does not work for is in-depth, story-driven RPGs. As much, anyway. I think I remember the exact moment that I got annoyed at procedural generation and realised it was crap. I was playing an old PC game called Soldier of Fortune. Don't know if you guys ever played Soldier of Fortune, but I am showing my age with that. I had a friend who had it on PC, and they were like, this is the most amazing game ever, Soldier of Fortune. When you shoot someone with a shotgun, their arm blows off and blood goes everywhere. And it was advertised as like this really gory game. And then I played it, I'm like, it's pretty good. And then there was a procedural generation mission mode. So I started playing it. And in one mission, I started off in the woods, and I walked forward, and I walked past a tractor. Then I walked forward, and I walked past a hay bale. And then I saw a building in the distance, and I killed the enemy. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Then I did another procedural mission, and I started in the woods, and I walked forward. This time there was a hay bale. And then I walked forward, and there was a building with a tractor next to it. And I thought, right, I can see what's going on with the procedural generation here, and I cannot deny this is a different level to the previous. But in another, more realistic way, it is not a different level to the previous in any way. When people say to me, people advertise games at me like I'm meant to be impressed. They're like, you can land on this planet and imagine walking forward and exploring a cave. Okay, I've done that in many games. Has this cave been created by a designer? Has this cave been created as part of a greater narrative, as part of a greater plot? Because I pretty much explored a cave in Skyrim and I found that massive underground city. They're like, oh no, you'll find nothing. That's not the selling point you think it is. When someone says to me, procedural generation, you can have an amazing landscape. Look, mate, landscape-wise, you're up against Elden Ring. Who in Elden Ring took one of the elevators down and thought, oh, there's going to be a small cave, and then discovered an entire second city under the ground? That level of design is impressive. You would not get that in procedural generation. There is a point to it in games, but creating more unrefined game is not it. That's what procedural generation does. It creates a lot of stuff that doesn't relate to itself or to other things. Good games need to do that. You could not click procedurally generate and create Mass Effect from scratch. It wouldn't be able to create, Baldur's Gate. It wouldn't be able to create any kind of, narrative-driven game that we like, because human creativity is needed for that. Sorry to rant about this, but I just get very upset that the buzzwords that executives use to advertise games are absolutely not the buzzwords that actual gamers tend to care about. I've met so many people who love video games who don't care about the buzzword of the week or the buzzword of the year. And then I've met people who don't love video games but are involved in their creation who absolutely bloody love buzzwords because they can't wait for the next amazing big breakthrough thing. It's like how every 10 years Hollywood tries to make 3D cinema happen, and people that are going to the cinema don't necessarily want that. Business people are not always gamers. And when you meet someone who is a business person and a gamer, they tend to understand. They tend to get it. Which is why I think you have things like Final Fantasy XIV being designed by someone who plays it. You have Larian and Baldur's Gate 3 being designed by people who play it. You have games designed by people who play games tend to work out and become really good games. Let's just have a quick chat back up. It's funny we appreciate these older games more than the new ones because back then developers actually... I think developers realized that they couldn't outsource or procedurally generate anything, and so they had to put it in. Maybe this is what it is. If you know that you can create a huge amount of quantity without a lot of effort, then you create a huge amount of quantity, and then you just put small bits of quality throughout it, which means you end up with a big game with little bits of quality here and there. Now, to the player, that'll feel like a really big game with some bits of quality, but there is filler between the quality. There is the procedural generation. Back when you couldn't do that, every bit of the game had to be quality. Like, every single bit of the game was like, right, this can't be filler because this takes time to make, so we may as well just make this good. If we're going to design this anyway, why don't we design this in a way that actually does or says something? I think, to me, a good game that does and says something every level would be Future Cop LAPD. Every level in Future Cop is good. There is very little filler in that game, if any at all. Games like Rayman, every level was trying to do something. Even games like Tomb Raider, every level was trying to do something. Procedural generation is a great way to save time and create a lot of stuff that might not necessarily be high quality. But then you have games like Hades or the roguelikes and the roguelites that use procedural generation to just create something. But I don't necessarily think that's filling in the gaps between the good gameplay. That is several good gameplay components all being thrown together. Like, if Starfield could procedurally generate planets and every planet was absolutely jam-packed with stuff to do, cool. Now, I am also aware that there is a beauty, a power, if you will, a level of impressiveness to a huge amount of nothing. When you ride out into the desert in Final Fantasy XIV, you're like, holy crap, this is huge. This is massive. This is really impressive. You ride out into the desert or the ocean in any game and you're like, you know what, this is a lot of nothing and this is impressive. That can be impressive in itself if it's one big lot of nothing. The danger comes when you are filling in every single part of your game between the quality bits with a lot of nothing. They're like, hey, this bit's good, this bit's good, this bit's good. And they're all connected by a bit of nothing. And I'm thinking, okay, why don't we just get rid of those bits of nothing? Just put all the good bits next to each other. All the good bits right there. The game would be shorter, but it would also be more intense. And I like that. Modern games don't have many limits outside of man hours and budget, so old games working around limits. That's true. Do you find that limits breed creativity? I think they do. Limits breed creativity. If you are forced to adhere to a limit, you will find a way to work within that limit, and this often makes you more creative. That's one thing that I used to teach when I was teaching theatre all the time. People would come up to me and they would say things like, oh, we need to have a shootout, but we can't afford the guns, or, oh, we need to have a stage kiss, but we can't make it look real. We need to have an explosion happen right now, but we don't have the pyrotechnics to show an explosion. Okay, cool. Limits are problems, and as you've just said in the chat, which is perfect, this is a way that we need to solve the problem. You can add a certain charm. For example, Monty Python, that's a great example. Deeper, you and me are going to the same place in this one. Monty Python could not afford horses when they were doing Monty Python and the Holy Grail, so they got the coconuts. They solved the problem, and it was amazing. Have you seen this is one I always go to. Have you seen the original Deadpool film? In the very first Deadpool film, it was meant to end with a shootout scene. But they ran out of budget and realized they couldn't do the shootout scene. So you know that scene where Wade realizes that he's left the guns in the taxi and they can't do the shootout, and he just says, fine, maximum effort, walks forward and draws for the melee fight? That was because they couldn't afford all the guns for that scene, so they just wrote into the film, Wade forgets the guns. And then they go in and just do an actual melee thing instead. But it worked really well. That's a great example of a limit being forced to follow into a... There was another one. I mean, here's an example. Who has seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail? I know this is, again, everyone's showing my age, but I'm hoping you will have done because it's a great film. Monty Python and the Holy Grail. How does it end? How does it end? That film. It's a strange... When you think about it, like, hang on, how does that end? That film. Police drive in and arrest everyone. Do you know why they put that in? It's a cop-out. That's actually what it is. They couldn't work out how to end the film well. So they said, you know what? We'll just do a cop-out ending, which is slang for we'll do it badly. It's a literal cop-out because they had the police come in and arrest everyone. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant way of solving a problem. Here's another example. And again, I can go on about examples in film and TV all day. Have you seen Always Sunny in Philadelphia? I adore Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I think it's fantastic. One of the best written and best acted TV shows ever made. I think it's absolutely fantastic. There is an episode, I think it's the end of season 6 or season 7, that takes place entirely within a laser tag arena. They ran out of budget. They totally ran out of budget, and they had to do an episode entirely in one location. That's all they had. So they just went, right, we're going to write this with just actors and just do it here. That's how we're going to work. Have I seen it now? Yes, I have. I've watched most of it, and I think it's fantastic. Limitations and budgets are great, and I think what's happening is massive, huge AAA studios are realizing that they don't have limitations anymore, and so they are not being forced to find the creative solutions that they used to have to come up with. I mean, what happens when a gaming studio refuses to accept working within limitations and instead constantly creeps the scale of its own game? Constant scope creep, constant feature creep. You get some Star Citizen. That's what you get. When a company, when a creative in any industry refuses to accept limitations, you end up constantly reaching for more and more and more and more and more, and never discovering the heart, the honesty, the truth, the genuine passion that will come from overcoming those limitations. That to me is a real shame. Genuinely. It really is. AAA and big budget just means throw more loot boxes in, no limitations needed. Silent Hill 1. They could not render the entire game on the PlayStation hardware. So what did they do? They added in fog. Best choice they made. Limitations. Breeding creativity.